So we're going to talk about death notification. As I said before, this is probably really the most important thing you're going to do for this family. How you notify them is really going to determine the course of their grief journey. So there's these 5 principles of death notification: in time, in person, in pairs, in plain language, and with compassion. So in time, and this is really hard right now, and somebody said it earlier, that with the advent of social media, you really lose your edge on getting this done. Now, in my case, I had told you he was killed at 6:14 in the morning. I was notified like 11:15, and you know, everybody in town seemed to know already. I told you I was a waitress. When I got to my in-laws' house, there was already a food tray there from where I worked. So that really bothered me for a long time. And then I realized, I just had this epiphany one day, years later, I bet they didn't know where we lived, right? Because his paperwork hadn't been handed in. So they probably just went to his parents' house, and of course you're not going to do this quickly. They spent time with his parents, and then they came and got me. I mean, that made me feel better when I realized that, but they never told me that. So you really want to provide this notification as soon as you can. And there's a couple things that have to happen rather quickly, right? You have to know who the next of kin is. You have to know where they live. Are there parents and a spouse? So you've got a lot of information to gather rather quickly. You also may want to consider maybe the health status of especially parents if they're elderly, okay? Try to know as many details of the death that you possibly can. It's okay not to know everything. You just tell them, I will get you this information as soon as I can. You don't want to ever, lie or anything. We had one survivor, dear friend of mine. Her husband was a trooper. He was shot through a door during a domestic call in his face. And when they came, the colonel wanted to make this notification himself. So he sent a trooper to the house, and he said, just hold her there so that I can make this notification. Trooper went there. So he said, your husband's been shot, but he's okay. So he kept her at the house for 3 hours until the colonel got there. And then she found out he'd been dead the whole time. So now for 3 hours, she's thinking, my husband is injured, he needs me. And then she finds out he's been dead this whole time. I mean, what do you think her level of stress was? Right? What do you think was going through her mind? How angry was she? Do you think she had anger against the agency for a long time? Right? So, it's all well and good to have the head of the agency make that notification, but it's really not feasible, especially in today's world, and that was even before social media. Especially in today's world, you can't always pick and choose who's going to make this notification. We can plan all we want about who you want to make the notification and all that kind of stuff, but in reality, it's got to be done quickly because of social media. So you get as much information as you can, and you want to get to that family as soon as you can. It's also, you really want to make sure that the paperwork that's going to have the next of kin, the address, all that stuff, all that emergency paperwork has to be accessible to the sergeant. So it can't be in an office locked up during the evening where nobody has access to it. So that's something that's really important. And I would say, I think it's a supervisor, a sergeant and up, I think it's your responsibility to broach the topic of paperwork with your officers on a regular basis. A lot changes. People, they get married, they get divorced, they have children. A lot of things change. And usually the paperwork is not the first thing on their mind. They don't even think about that. And it's very important. Okay, so with social media, do you have a social media policy in New York? Yeah? Does it work for you? You know, you really want to, I think you've got to try to get buy-in with the officers as well as the families and let them know, like, if this was your family, would you want them to find out this way? It's fine to call your family and let them know an incident happened, but I'm okay. Don't post anything. Same thing with other agencies, right? Because that's a big thing, whether it's a fire department, EMS, or a neighboring police department, them possibly posting something before your agency has had a chance to make an official statement. So it's really important to take all of those considerations into the social media policy, okay? It's not an easy thing to enforce, but I think that if you can talk to the spouses, because that's a big thing too, right? Officers may post things, they may not, or maybe they don't because they know they shouldn't, but what about their spouse? You know? And it's like, it's wildfire, isn't it? When something's going on, for the families at home, they play that telephone, everybody calls everybody, and just by process of elimination, you know who it is. So this is something that definitely needs to be addressed, especially with regards to a death notification. Okay, so in person. You always want to do this in person. You don't want to make a phone call, right? Because what's the first thing that's going to happen when you call somebody? What are they going to do? They're going to get in their car, right? They're going to try and drive somewhere. And that's just, I mean, people, when they have this kind of news, they don't want to, you shouldn't have them behind a wheel. If they're not in the right frame of mind to drive, they don't have the concentration level, and you don't want to compound that tragedy by them having an accident, okay? If you are transporting the family anywhere and they're in the car, you don't want to have that information come over the radio that they can hear things going on. Also, there may be other people that hear the radio, and I don't know so much if it's a thing now, but it used to be years ago where law enforcement families had the scanners at home, right? And you can hear all the conversations. So all of that information dealing with the death of the officer should not be made over the radio. And when you are telling somebody, honesty is always the best policy. Just be as honest as you can. I know you have a tendency to want to protect people, right? To take away their pain, to make it easier. And this isn't something that's easy. And you can't take away their pain. And, like I said with my friend, when she was lied to, that doesn't make anything better in the long run and the short run. So honesty is always the best policy. And it's okay to say, I don't have all the details right now, I don't know, but we'll get them for you as soon as we can. So pairs, it's really advantageous to have two people, and sometimes one of those people being a woman might be good, especially if there are children, because sometimes kids might relate better to a woman, so it's just something to think about. They generally say one should be in uniform. I mean, for me, my notification started as soon as I saw that police car pull up. It was the car, and then it was the priest and the uniform officer. For me, that was that. Even though I knew it, in my subconscious I knew it, my conscious couldn't accept it, but I knew that started for me. That set the tone for me. So, as we mentioned here again, don't wait for anybody. It's all well and good if there's a high-ranking officer who wants to make this notification with you, but do not wait for them. It does not serve any purpose, any good purpose. They can meet up with the family at some point in the rest of the day. Some people who are really helpful with this are chaplains. Chaplains, they make a lot of notifications, right? And they work with people. I know priests do a lot of last rites, right? So you're working with death and dying really quite a lot. And you know, they've got a lot of experience with this. So I know that the NYPD has chaplains. Utilize them. You could utilize the C.O.P.S chapter as well. You know, that might be helpful. I know we have several chapters who have a death response team. Indiana, they have a great response team, and the survivors on that chapter have been trained. Do you ever make notifications in your chapter? Have you done that? Okay. They haven't, but I would also say pulling the chapter in prior to the funeral is a good idea. In my opinion, that's a good idea because you are showing that family, one, you're giving them a connection, two, you're giving them hope, and then when they see them at the funeral, it's that little beacon of light where, you know, they have that connection. And it starts right there. We really wind up becoming a family in our little survivor community. I mean, people that I've met to the day their officer was killed, wound up years later going to Disney together, going to weddings, right? Sam has slept over my house with my daughter, they're friends. And, you know, so we really become a very tight community. And for you to help facilitate that by bringing the C.O.P.S chapter in early is awesome. So coworker or friend making this notification, what are your thoughts on that? Is that a good idea, a bad idea?
When my husband was killed, when they left the first night, they said, you know, one of the girls Glenn worked with for years, that they told her and me that she was going to be my liaison, whatever. Okay?
Right.
She was supposed to come over the next day and spend as much time as she could. Well, she was grieving so badly that the next day, she called and said, well, just call me when you need me to come over. And that was not the way it was supposed to be.
No. Okay.
So I think it would have been better with, I mean, she was a friend and a coworker, but I think it might have been better with somebody else that wasn't grieving as hard as she was.
So what Sue has said is that her husband's coworker had been assigned, and she kind of volunteered and was assigned to come over the next day to be a liaison for the family, and she couldn't because she was grieving. So she couldn't, so she wound up not coming, and you know that puts a burden of stress on that officer, on that family. So that is something, yes, it's your friend, but you're grieving too. So it might not necessarily be a good idea to put somebody in that position where they have to deliver that news. You know, sometimes there are studies actually that people who deliver that kind of news are perceived with a negative connotation afterwards. You know, especially with kids, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So sometimes it might be really hard for you to deliver that kind of news to somebody, and then for years later it's always going to be, oh yeah, that's the person who told me my husband died. In plain language. So, I mean, obviously you want to identify yourself and ask to come in. Never make a notification on a doorstep. You know, you've really got to prepare for anything, so you kind of, I know, like, it's like textbook, right? Sit down. So just somebody's going to tell you bad news, the first thing they say is sit down. I don't, you know, but you don't want anybody fainting and falling and getting hurt. So you want to be inside. You don't want nosy neighbors watching everything. You know, like Eileen said, in the summer with the windows open, the neighbors could hear inside their house, you know, so you want to deliver this news as privately as you can. So definitely bring it indoors. You do want to be, you know, plain language. Your officer has died, he was killed. You don't want to say he's gone. You don't want to say, you know, she passed away. You have to say it in plain language. And the reason for that is you really are in shock. You know, you don't want to leave doubt for somebody. You know, it just helps them. Do not call the officer the body. All right, the officer had a name, use his name. Okay, and they're going to have questions. They're going to want to know as much detail as you can provide them. What happened? Where did it happen? They're going to even ask you why it happened. And there's going to be answers that you might have and you might not. You might not have answers yet. Things might be unfolding. So you just let them know what you know. Okay? Oops, I did a bad thing. Wait a second. Oh, there. Whew. Got scared. Okay, with compassion. So, yeah, the 3 F's. This is what you can expect. You know, somebody's going to fight, flight, run away, or freeze. Like I said earlier, when they told me my husband had been killed, I was calm as a cucumber, right? I even remember getting ready to walk out the door with them saying, oh, wait a second, I have to turn the coffee maker off. I was in such shock. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And in my heart, I was like, there's got to be a mistake. There's got to be a mistake. They're wrong. This can't be right. But if that officer who was there making that notification, if he just looked at how I acted, I could imagine he'd go back to the department and say, oh my God, she was just so cold. She didn't care. They must have been having problems. I bet you she was having, all this stuff, right? She's having an affair because she didn't care. And then, I mean, you're making all these judgments. You have no idea how you would take this news. You don't. You might think you do, but you really have no idea. Everybody is different. And it's really, really important not to make judgment calls. When you do go back to the department, everybody's going to ask you, how'd she take it? What did he say? I wouldn't give details. It's private. How do you think she took it? Her husband died, So, because where I lived, South Orange was a small town. It was like living in a fishbowl. Everybody had an opinion. Everybody had an opinion. Oh, you'll find somebody else. You'll find somebody else. You'll get married again. That's all you kept hearing, right? What do you think happens when I went out on a date? Can you believe she's dating? And it's funny. It was within a year that I went out on a date. I was lonely. I just wanted that companionship. So this guy I met at work asked me out. I said yes. Came over, take me out to dinner, invited him in to have a drink. Figured let's have some conversation. I did what any normal widow would do. I showed him my wedding album, which every picture was keep. So for an hour, we got to look at my wedding album and talk about my dead husband. He never called me again. But like to somebody on the outside, she's dating, she's moved on, she doesn't care about him. That couldn't have been further from the truth. I wasn't ready for anything. Just wanted to be normal, right? I wanted to be normal. I wanted to be done with this grief stuff and do something normal. So there's a lot that goes on that, doesn't always add up to somebody not caring or not grieving. So just kind of don't judge. Okay. Talked about this. No, don't give a sense of false hope. Right? Do not lie. And it's okay to show your emotions. I would say that you should not be hysterically crying when you're making this notification, as maybe a coworker or a best friend might. But it's okay if you cry. It's okay if you show emotion. And I am a firm believer that by showing emotion, you're giving people permission to show emotion back. Okay? And religion, I leave religion out of this. I let people kind of guide the way. If somebody's religious and that gives them comfort, they're going to bring it up, and then I go with it. But you don't want to impose your religious beliefs on somebody. Okay, I see the father nodding his head, right? Because sometimes religion is intensely personal, and sometimes people are very angry at God at that point. So you really, where you think you might be giving them comfort, you're not. Okay. You're not gonna make this notification and leave. You're gonna be there a while, so prepare to be there a while. You may have to take the family to the hospital. You might not. You might just stay at the house for a while. This is a different notification than, you know, some regular Joe off the street. Okay, this is family, so you're gonna be here a while. Again, where it comes in handy to have two people, if there are children involved, one person can stay until a family member can come to be with the children while you take the spouse to the hospital, if that is what they desire. Okay? And you don't ever want to leave any. At some point, yes, you're going to go home. It's not like you're moving in the spare room or anything. But when you leave, make sure there's a support system in place, that there's another family member or friend who has arrived to help so that this person is not alone. Okay. And yeah, obviously, you're going to leave your contact information. So like I said, they did not allow me to see my husband. They made that choice for me after very cruelly letting me think I was being taken to him. That bothered me for many years. I had nightmares for about 2 years because I really felt like I abandoned him when he needed me and I wasn't able to be there for him. So it really was a very difficult thing for me to go through. It's the survivor's decision. It's not your decision. And you're not being kind by making it for them. And I will say that when something like this happens to a person, you have no control in your life. Your life is totally upended. The rug's pulled out from under you. Wherever you can give people the opportunity to have some control over their world is a good thing. Whether it's making small decisions or, important decisions like this. Like Eileen's decision to stay with her children as opposed to going to the hospital. There might have been somebody in the department who would have been very pushy and said to her, no, you'll regret this, you have to come. It's not your place. If that's what she wanted, you have to honor that. We had a survivor whose husband was shot and killed in his head, and they would not let her see her husband. And then the department, they said it was really bad. It was really bad. So it was a closed casket. So she never saw him. Now you fast forward a couple years and they're in court and they're for the trial. So when the judge heard that she had never seen her husband or any of these pictures or anything, he called her into his chambers and he arranged the pictures from least offensive to most offensive, and he showed her the pictures one by one. So she sees the first picture of him, on scene with the bullet in his head, and it was a little bullet right here. How do you think she felt? Right? How do you think she felt? It was just a hole. So for 2-3 years, what do you think she was thinking? Right? Your imagination can be really bad sometimes. If they wouldn't let her see him, and if they insisted on a closed casket, his whole face must have been blown off. I bet you he had nothing left in his face. So this is the image that she was living with. Because if you don't have an image, your mind will make one up. It'll make one up. So that's the image she had been living with. So do you think she was upset? Right? How do you think she felt towards that agency? Now, they did that to protect her, but it wasn't their call to protect her, and they ultimately did more damage. So you don't want to take any items with you when you make that notification. I know some departments, their uniforms are department issue and they have to go back to the department. That's not the time to take anything with you, not at all. And you just want to assist with any decision making, like I said, giving that survivor that control back. Does anybody have any questions so far? Or comments? So when you notify children, it's good if you can know maybe how many children there are, how old they are, that might help you going into the situation, and again, that might make a difference of who you have on that notification team, thinking like maybe somebody's going to have to stay behind with the children. And you may want to tell the parent that, you know, I can assist you in making this notification. Would you like me to make the notification for you? As I said earlier, they have shown some, especially with kids, they've shown some, there's been some studies that show children, when they learn of a parent's death, the notifier it becomes like a negative person for them. So if the mother or father notify that child that the other parent was killed, they might hate that parent that's living because they kind of tie them up to the other parent's death in their mind. So sometimes it's easier to not connect finding out that your mom or dad died with the living parent by having somebody else make that notification. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and again, you know, knowing that, you might go into this situation, no, I really have to make this notification for you. You know, parents have the final say. So, and they might know their children very well enough, you know, but just kind of giving them that information so that they can make an informed decision is the best thing you can do. And when you're talking to kids, you just want to keep it age appropriate, simple, honest. You know, it's not an easy thing. So, okay. So you definitely want to follow up when you leave there that day. There should be a follow-up plan in place. If it's not the notifier, it's going to be somebody else, and you should be telling that family who's coming, what time they're coming. Make sure you leave your contact information. It's weird, but to this day, the officer who was there at that notification, he's just a uniform to me. I can't even tell you what he looked like. I can't see his face. I don't even know who it was. You know, so he could be somebody that I knew very well. And he might think, well, she needs anything, she'll call me. It just, you know, it's almost like, you know the Charlie Brown cartoon? How the parents sound it? Wah, 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 wah. It's like once you get that bad news, you get that tunnel vision, and, you know, your world goes like this, and then what you hear is distorted. So you're obviously not retaining a lot of the things you hear. So keep that in mind when you deal with grieving people. You might have to repeat yourself several times. Might be helpful to have a log, you know, where what you discussed on what day, just so you can go back to it too, so you can have that information. So knowing that there's going to be a liaison officer for this family, and you have solidified a follow-up plan with the family, that's really the final step in a death notification. So then now that death notification is complete. Like you don't want to leave that house without letting the family know what the next steps are, what they can expect. Okay. So for people who have done notifications, is this pretty much the way you do it? Does anybody do anything differently? Yes. Right.
Any documents that they may have left behind, I think that's best done maybe perhaps after the once you do the follow-up, once you make contact with a liaison to remind them.
Right, right.
But discussing it once you've given that death notification is definitely not the right time.
Yeah, so her comment is not discussing insurance or money at that point. I will tell you, some people might, the first thing they're going to think of is, am I going to lose my house? How am I going to support my children? You know, and that's an absolutely normal reaction, and I would just say you don't have to worry about that at this moment. We will discuss benefits with you in a few days. Let's just get through the funeral right now. So you can kind of put them at ease a little bit, but not really get into that discussion. Okay? Yes, Father.
I would say also the language of the next of kin is important. Sometimes the next of kin may not be able to speak.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That definitely. If you have some of this information on I think there should be a line about that on the paperwork for the officer. Like, do your parents speak English? Is English your second language? And if you know that, then maybe you can try and pull a bilingual person in. So, yes.
I just want to say that in general, this is like all the rules to follow, but we get to make a notification of an off-duty officer who was killed, and you legally instruct a car down going on the highway. So there's a certain time maybe when, I'm just saying, like, let's not follow these 100%. Like, I have to use your hands.
Absolutely.
In addition to all this. Like, I was going to tell his father that his son killed somebody driving drunk.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, I mean, I know that's an obvious example, nobody's gonna do that, but
Right.
there's certain instances, I think, where maybe, we may not 100% be a good idea at that point.
That's a tough call. That's a really tough call. I think that if you're asked a point blank question, you can't lie. Yeah, you can't lie. But yeah, telling him your son was killed in an auto accident and the rest of the information come out. And I don't know, Brent, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, if I understood this scenario, the officer was DUI?
Yes.
Yeah, so you've got a really ugly aspect of that case, is right? Is that what you're kind of getting at? My instinct would be on the initial notification to keep it, which I think is where you're going, would be to keep it very high level, focus on the death itself and not as much the circumstances. And then there's going to be the follow-up conversation with that. Obviously, you're not talking about lying or deceiving or anything. Sometimes the notification person, we found it almost best in a lot of cases for them to be blind to it. In terms of, we just know that some basic circumstances about that, because sometimes the family will want to ask a billion questions, and either the facts are still coming in and we don't want to be speculative and so on and so forth, and it can buy leadership just a little bit of time while still being truthful, because the person making the notification hasn't been fully briefed in. And when they are able to say, I don't know those details, but I know that they're going to come to you, that's legitimate, and it buys you a little bit of time to figure out how you want to present, especially if you have that's a very difficult situation. Mm-hmm. But my instinct would be to keep it, having gone only through one other thing like that, is just focus on the death itself, and then there's going to be a secondary conversation about the other aspects to it.
Yeah, and absolutely, everything that we've gone over, that's the ideal, and nothing ever works the way it should, right? So there are going to be things that will be easy for you to do and things that will be hard based on the circumstance, but this is, as much as you can stick to this as possible, is really the best notification for the family. Okay. Now, when you have to notify in another jurisdiction, like if the parents lived, this you find pretty much a lot, the parents don't always live the same place as the officer, reach out to that agency wherever the parents live and ask them to make the notification. Likewise, you might be called upon to make a notification for another agency. Okay? And then try to consider travel to bring let's assume it's the parents, to bring the parents back to where the spouse or the family is, if that's what they want, so that they're not traveling on their own. Now in the workplace, if somebody's working, if you have to notify somebody, you follow the same principles. The only difference is when you ask to speak to the supervisor, you're not going to give them any information because it's not their business. And then you want to make sure that you get a private room. Okay, again, privacy. This is very difficult information. Everybody's so nosy. We were talking earlier, somebody somehow people love to be the bearer of bad news, right? They like to show that they have all the facts and they tell everybody and they gossip and, so it's not their business. So secure a private room and then do not let that person drive. You take them where they have to go. If they want to go home, if they have to go to the hospital, if they go somewhere else, you take them. And then the injured officer notification. Did you want to go over this?
I'm gonna kind of touch on this a little bit more during the during the hospital piece, so you can lightly touch it, and then I'll come back.
So this is going to be, a different type of notification, obviously, than a death notification. And if the officer is in a position where he's coherent, he or she is coherent and can talk at all, ask them to get on the phone and say, hey, I'm okay. Because if the family can hear the voice, then they know, maybe it's not that bad. Because there are times when, the injury is not that bad, but then when you're getting this notification, you already, in your mind, have them dead, right? And that's a whole lot of stress somebody's just gone through where they don't have to. And you want to make sure that the spouse or the parents, that they're not driving because they're distracted. They want to get there as fast as they can when they go to the hospital to be there. So you offer to drive them. And then there should be a support person at the family. Okay, just as with a line of duty death, which we're going to go over at the hospital, when an officer is injured, there should be a point person from the agency to be the liaison between the doctors, the media, and the family. Okay?
Madeline, just as you're going to that, just one small caveat on if the officer's injured, the general principle is if they're injured and you can get them on the phone, they can talk to their family, right? We probably all practice that in terms of they're the best voice to their spouse, for example, to say, hey, they're taking me to the hospital, I'm okay, and so on and so forth. That's a good general rule, just like you were just saying kind of about the notification general principle. The only thing to watch out for is if the officer is shocky, the officer has a decreased level of consciousness or something, that we've actually had that be more traumatic, because when the officer gets on, it actually really elevates the stress, because the spouse can hear, that is not my officer, like that something's really crazy going on. And in those cases, sometimes because people follow that principle that we're talking about, like to the nth degree, we found it more helpful if you've got their coworker officer who's in good standing and not injured to say, hey, they're taking Brent to the hospital, he's fine, he actually wanted to talk to you, he's fine, because you have a relationship, you trust me or whatever, but we're going to come pick you up. But they're able to be a more calm presence as opposed to the officer, because we've had officers who just say, I've been shot, I'm fine, talk to you later, like that type of thing. And then we end up, that is a traumatic event for the spouse that maybe could have been handled different. So that's the one little caveat there.
And I just want to bring these up. A lot of people seem to say these things, and they don't really help anybody. And it's, again, sometimes it brings out a lot of anger towards God in some people, and it's just not. They're just not helpful. And I'm gonna ask you guys to comment on that.
I would say we made a notification to the person responds differently. Everybody, there's no set way of dealing with it. As soon as they see you, they know exactly something's dead. Is it alive or is it in the hospital? One of the things is that when you walk in, there's three people that they hate immediately. You so that you can fool around and joke with them as time goes by. I mean, I love Kathy and Gil, but Gil, so.
I know, I think the same thing.
Kathy feels that, it's a family thing. Adam, when he's around, he's sitting all the time. Eileen, for the first several years that we had memorial masses, that I said mass, she never got up to speak, and all of a sudden one year she got up to speak, and it took all the cops, and I think that she does a great job in helping other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's all about. So,
Absolutely.
and that whole relationship with God, it heals up.
Right, right. But these statements aren't really helpful.
No, not at all.
Not at all. Yeah. So
God will be the first one to say, don't use my name today.
there you go.
Enough said on that slide.
But
Jeez, that's good.
you know, and it's funny because I could never talk about this. Never. It took me years to be able to talk about it. And as soon the first time I spoke, those floodgates opened, and for so many years I never cried because I felt weak if I cried. And that time that I first spoke about it, I was crying, I had mascara and eyeliner all over my face, and I haven't shut up since. You know, but this is healing to me. This is, it initially started out, like you said, ministering to others, because that brings it full circle, trying to make some sense out of this tragedy by doing something good and helping others. And then you just feel like if what I've been through can be of a help to anybody, I want to do that.